Millionaire CEO thought his blind date was a cleaning lady, but she was hiding an extraordinary secret. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Nathaniel Ward thought he had everything figured out. The 38-year-old CEO of Ward Innovations lived in a world of perfect order, expensive suits, and calculated decisions. Love was a luxury he could not afford. Vulnerability, a weakness he could not risk. Then came a single blind date that shattered every assumption he held about worth, class, and what truly matters in life. She called herself Sara, a cleaning lady with calloused hands and an infectious laugh who saw straight through his wealth to the lonely man beneath. But Serafina Dubois carried secrets that could destroy them both, a billionaire heiress hiding behind humble clothes, terrified that her fortune would poison any chance at authentic love. As their hearts opened to each other, a ruthless enemy watched and waited, ready to weaponize their deepest vulnerabilities. Sometimes the greatest fortune is finding someone who loves you for who you truly are. Sometimes the greatest risk is letting them. Marcus, I do not have time for this nonsense. Nathaniel Ward barely glanced up from the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk as his childhood friend, Marcus Thompson, settled into the leather chair opposite him. When was the last time you had dinner with someone who was not a client or a board member? Marcus asked, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had known Nathaniel since they were 12 years old. Nathaniel finally looked up, his green eyes sharp with irritation. The morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, cast harsh shadows across his perfectly shaven face. I had dinner with you last month. That was a business meeting about the Henderson account, and you know it. Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Nat, you are 38 years old. You built this company from nothing. You have more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes, and you are completely alone. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Nathaniel set down his pen with deliberate precision, the same control he applied to every aspect of his life. His office reflected that control perfectly. Every document filed, every surface spotless, every piece of furniture positioned with mathematical exactness. I am not alone. I have 512 employees, 17 board members, and more professional contacts than I can count. You have employees and contacts. That is not the same thing as having people who actually care about you. Marcus pulled out his phone and set it on the desk. There is someone I want you to meet. Nathaniel almost smiled at the predictability of his friend's concern. Marcus had been trying to set him up with various women for the past 3 years, ever since his engagement to Rebecca Hartley had ended in spectacular failure. Rebecca had been perfect on paper, Harvard-educated, from a prominent family, impeccably groomed. She had also been sleeping with his business rival while planning their wedding. I appreciate your concern, but I am not interested in another Rebecca. I do not need someone who wants to marry my bank account. This woman is nothing like Rebecca. Marcus scrolled through his contacts with the determination of a man on a mission. Her name is Sara. She works hard, she has a beautiful heart, and she could not care less about your money because she has no idea who you are. She does not know who I am. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Did you forget to mention that I run one of the largest tech companies in the state? I told her you work in business. That is all she needs to know for now. Marcus found the contact he was looking for and held up the phone. One dinner, Nat. What do you have to lose? Nathaniel looked at his friend's earnest face and felt something stir in his chest, a loneliness he had been ignoring for months. His penthouse apartment was a showcase of expensive furniture and artwork, but it felt like a museum. He ate most of his meals at his desk or alone in restaurants where the staff knew his order by heart. Even his housekeeper worked during the day while he was at the office, leaving him notes about completed tasks rather than actual human interaction. You said she works hard. What does she do? She is a cleaning lady. Marcus watched Nathaniel's face carefully. Before you say anything, she's intelligent, funny, and genuine in a way that will surprise you. When was the last time you met someone who judged you based on your character instead of your net worth? Nathaniel stood and walked to the window, looking down at the busy street 30 floors below. People moved like ants along the sidewalks, each carrying their own hopes, dreams, and struggles. When was the last time he had talked to someone about something other than quarterly projections or market analysis? A cleaning lady, he repeated, and heard the skepticism in his own voice. Yes, a cleaning lady. Someone who understands the value of honest work, who appreciates simple pleasures, who might teach you something about what really matters in life. And what makes you think I need to learn anything? Marcus joined him at the window. Because you just worked 16 straight days without taking a single evening off. Because you have not laughed, really laughed in months. Because you are so afraid of being hurt again that you are not really living at all. The truth in those words hit harder than Nathaniel wanted to admit. He had built walls so high around his heart that even he sometimes forgot what was behind them. The thought of letting someone new past his defenses felt both terrifying and oddly appealing. Where would we meet? Somewhere casual, a coffee shop maybe. Let her see you as just a regular guy. I am not a regular guy. For one evening, you could be... Marcus put a hand on his friend's shoulder. What if she is exactly what you did not know you were looking for? Nathaniel considered this as he watched the people below navigate their ordinary lives with what looked like purpose and connection. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe he had been so focused on protecting himself from the wrong kind of woman that he had closed himself off from the right kind entirely. One dinner, he said finally, but I choose the restaurant. No, you do not. Marcus was already texting. Let me handle the arrangements. Trust me on this one, Nat. As his friend left the office, Nathaniel returned to his reports, but the numbers seemed less important than they had an hour ago. For the first time in years, he was curious about something that could not be quantified in a spreadsheet. He was curious about Sara. The coffee shop Marcus had chosen was nothing like the places where Nathaniel usually conducted business. Mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and the rich aroma of freshly ground beans created an atmosphere that was warm and unpretentious. He checked his watch, 7 o'clock exactly, and scanned the room for someone who might be waiting for him. She was sitting in the corner booth, reading a worn paperback novel with complete absorption. Auburn hair fell in soft waves around her face, and when she looked up, her brown eyes held a warmth that made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. Sara, he asked, approaching her table. You must be Nathan. She closed her book and smiled, and he found himself staring at the way her whole face transformed with that simple expression. Marcus said you would be easy to spot. Tall, dark hair and probably overdressed for a place like this. Nathaniel glanced down at his perfectly tailored suit and felt oddly self-conscious. Everyone else in the coffee shop was dressed casually, and he suddenly felt like he was wearing a costume. I came straight from work, he explained, settling into the chair across from her. What kind of work keeps you in a suit at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday? Business consulting, he said, using the vague description Marcus had suggested. Nothing very exciting. What about you? I clean offices downtown. Early mornings, mostly, so the business people arrive to everything sparkling clean. She grinned. Maybe I have cleaned your building. Do you work anywhere near 5th and Mason? He worked exactly at 5th and Mason. On the 30th floor of the building she probably cleaned before dawn. The irony was not lost on him. But something about her easy manner made him want to keep the conversation going, rather than correct her assumption about his circumstances. Something like that. Do you enjoy the work? Most people of his acquaintance would have laughed at the question. Who enjoyed cleaning offices? But Sara considered it seriously. I like the quiet time to think, and there is something satisfying about leaving a place better than I found it. Plus, I work with good people who look out for each other. She tilted her head, studying him. Do you enjoy your work? No one had asked him that question in years. People asked about his success, his profits, his growth projections, but never whether he actually enjoyed what he did. I used to, he admitted. I built my career around solving problems and creating something meaningful. But lately, it feels more like maintaining a machine than building something worthwhile. Maybe you need a new challenge, something that reminds you why you started in the first place. The insight surprised him with its simplicity and accuracy. When had he stopped thinking about building something meaningful and started focusing only on maintaining what he had already achieved? What about you? He asked. Is cleaning offices your long-term plan? For now, it pays the bills and gives me flexibility to pursue other interests. I take classes at the community college, volunteer at the literacy center on weekends. She paused to sip her coffee. I believe life is about more than just making money. Connection, learning, helping people, those things matter more than having the fanciest car or the biggest house. Nathaniel thought about his Tesla, his penthouse, his walk-in closet full of custom suits. All of it felt suddenly hollow compared to the light in her eyes when she talked about helping people learn to read. That sounds very fulfilling, he said, and meant it. What do you do when you are not working? She asked. The question stopped him cold. What did he do when he was not working? He worked out at an expensive gym where he barely spoke to anyone. He ate at high-end restaurants where he was known, but not known. He attended charity galas where he wrote large checks but had little personal investment in the causes. I am still figuring that out, he said finally. Well, that is honest. Her laugh was genuine and infectious. Most people would have given me a list of impressive hobbies. What would you put on your list? Reading, obviously. She gestured to her book. Hiking when the weather is nice. I make terrible pottery that my friends pretend to love. I cook for people. That might be my favorite thing. There is something magical about feeding someone a meal you made with your own hands. Nathaniel tried to remember the last time someone had cooked for him who was not being paid to do it. His housekeeper prepared meals according to his dietary requirements. Restaurants catered to his preferences, but when had anyone simply wanted to feed him? What are you reading? She held up the book, a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver. Do you read poetry? Not since college, he admitted. Business journals, mostly. Market analysis. Poetry is like concentrated truth, all the meaning packed into just the right words. She opened to a bookmarked page. Listen to this. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? The question hung between them like a challenge. What was he planning to do with his one wild and precious life? Build more wealth, acquire more companies, die alone in his perfect, sterile penthouse? That is a dangerous question, he said. The best questions usually are. She closed the book and looked at him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Marcus said you were interesting. I think he was right. 2 hours later, as they walked slowly to their cars, Nathaniel realized he had not thought about work once during their entire conversation. Sara had asked him questions no one had bothered to ask in years, about his childhood, his dreams, what made him laugh. She had listened to his answers as if they mattered, as if he was more than just a means to an end. I had a wonderful time, he said as they reached her modest sedan. So did I. She smiled up at him. Would you like to do this again sometime? Very much. As he drove back to his empty penthouse, Nathaniel found himself thinking about poetry and pottery and the way Sara's eyes had lit up when she talked about teaching adults to read. For the first time in months, He was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. He was looking forward to seeing her again. The park where they had agreed to meet for their second date was alive with the sounds of families enjoying the warm Saturday afternoon. Children played on swings while their parents watched from benches. Joggers followed the winding paths, and couples strolled hand in hand around the small lake. Nathaniel felt overdressed again in his casual khakis and button-down shirt, but Sara seemed to belong here naturally. "I brought lunch," she said, holding up a wicker basket. "I hope you do not mind picnics." When was the last time he had eaten a meal outdoors that was not catered by a five-star restaurant? That sounds perfect. She led him to a spot under an old oak tree, where she spread a checkered blanket with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. The basket revealed an impressive array of homemade food: sandwiches cut diagonally, fresh fruit, cookies that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. "You made all of this?" he asked, accepting a sandwich that looked like something from a gourmet cafe. "Cooking relaxes me. My grandmother taught me that food made with love tastes better than anything else." She bit into her own sandwich. "Tell me about your family." The familiar tightness in his chest returned. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 25. No siblings. It is just me now." Her expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I am so sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. They were good people. My father was an engineer. My mother taught high school. They worked hard, saved money, believed in doing the right thing even when it cost them." He paused, remembering their modest house and practical cars. "They would have liked you." "What makes you say that?" "They valued character over credentials. They would have respected what you do, how you live your life." Sara reached across the blanket and touched his hand briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. When was the last time someone had touched him with simple human kindness rather than calculated seduction? "They sound wonderful. Do you miss them?" "Every day. Sometimes I wonder if I built my career so aggressively to honor their memory or to distract myself from losing them. Maybe it was both. Grief makes us do complicated things." She withdrew her hand, but continued to look at him with that disconcerting directness. "Do you think they would be proud of who you have become?" The question caught him off guard. Would they? His parents had valued integrity, kindness, and service to others. His father had worked on projects that made communities safer. His mother had spent her evenings helping struggling students without expecting anything in return. What did his empire of technology and profit contribute to the world? "I hope so," he said finally, "but I am not sure. That uncertainty might be the most honest thing about you." They walked around the lake after lunch, their conversation flowing as easily as the gentle breeze across the water. Sara told him about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about finding her way to the city and discovering she was stronger than she had imagined. "What brought you here?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment, watching ducks glide across the lake's surface. "I needed a fresh start. Sometimes you have to leave everything familiar behind to figure out who you really are." There was something in her voice, a sadness or maybe a wariness, that made him want to know more. But she had turned the conversation back to him before he could ask, "What about you? Have you always lived here, born and raised?" "Sometimes I think about leaving, seeing other places, but this city has everything I need." "Does it? Everything you need?" The question made him consider what he actually needed versus what he had accumulated. His penthouse had everything money could buy, but did it have everything he needed? Connection, purpose, someone to share meals with who cared whether he had eaten. "I am starting to think I might have confused what I need with what I thought I wanted." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "What do you think you want?" "Success, control, security." The words felt hollow, even as he said them. What about you? Authenticity. Someone who sees me for who I really am, not what they think I can do for them. Her voice carried a weight of past disappointment. Someone who values truth over convenience. They had reached a secluded spot near the lake's edge, where willows created a natural canopy. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across their faces. "Sara," he said, and her name felt different in his mouth than it had during their first meeting, more important, more real. "Yes, I have not felt this comfortable with someone in a very long time. Maybe ever." She smiled, and he found himself memorizing the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the way her whole face seemed to glow with warmth. "Neither have I." When he leaned forward, she did not pull away. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of possibility rather than demand. It tasted like promises and felt like coming home to a place he had never been. As they separated, both breathing a little unsteadily, Nathaniel realized something that should have terrified him, but instead felt like relief. He was falling for this woman, this authentic, generous, genuine woman who saw him as just Nathan, not Nathaniel Ward, CEO and millionaire. For the first time since Rebecca, he wanted to be vulnerable with someone. He wanted to be known. The thought should have sent him running. Instead, it made him want to plan their third date before this one was over. The small Italian restaurant Sara had chosen was the kind of place Nathaniel would never have discovered on his own. Tucked into a narrow street lined with brick buildings, it had checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, and the comfortable chaos of a family-run establishment. The owner, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, greeted Sara like a long-lost daughter. "Bella Sara, you brought your young man." Sara blushed but did not correct the assumption. "Maria, this is Nathan." "Nathan, Maria makes the best pasta in the city." "Any friend of Sara's gets the special treatment," Maria announced, leading them to a corner table. "She teaches my grandson to read, you know, Beautiful Heart, this one." As they settled into their seats, Nathaniel found himself studying Sara's face in the candlelight. There was something about her that continued to fascinate him, a depth that seemed at odds with the simplicity of her life as she had described it. She spoke about literature with the passion of someone who had studied it formally, chose wine with knowledge that suggested more experience than her budget should have allowed, and moved through the world with a natural grace that seemed almost aristocratic. "How long have you been coming here?" he asked. "About 2 years. I discovered it by accident one day when I was walking home from work in the rain. Maria saw me looking lost and invited me in for coffee and something to eat." She smiled at the memory. "She has been trying to feed me ever since. She seems to care about you. People like Maria remind me that family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about who shows up when you need them." The waiter, who turned out to be Maria's son, brought them plates of pasta that looked and smelled incredible. As they ate, Sara asked questions that no one in Nathaniel's professional life would have thought to ask. "If you could change one thing about your work, what would it be?" "The isolation," he answered without thinking, then felt surprised by his own honesty. "I spend most of my time making decisions alone, eating meals alone, solving problems alone. Sometimes I wonder what the point of success is, if there is no one to share it with." "What kind of problems do you solve?" He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about the true scope of his business. "Technology issues, mostly, helping companies become more efficient." "Do you ever work on problems that help individual people rather than companies?" The question made him uncomfortable because the answer was rarely. His company developed systems that made businesses more profitable, but when was the last time he had created something that made someone's day-to-day life better? "Not as often as I should," he admitted. "Maybe that could be your one thing to change." She said it so simply, as if shifting the focus of his entire career was a matter of choosing to do so. But as he considered it, he realized she might be right. He had enough money to last several lifetimes. Why not use his skills and resources to tackle problems that mattered to people like Maria, like the students Sara tutored, like the communities his parents had cared about? "What about you?" he asked. "If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be?" She was quiet for so long that he wondered if he had asked something too personal. Finally, she looked up from her plate. "I would stop being afraid," she said. "Afraid of what? Of people leaving when they really get to know me, of being disappointed again, of trusting the wrong person." She met his eyes. "Of letting someone matter too much." The vulnerability in her voice made him want to reach across the table and take her hand, to promise her that she could trust him with whatever fears she carried. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "Someone hurt you. Someone I thought I knew well turned out to be someone completely different, someone who saw me as useful rather than valuable." She picked up her wineglass but did not drink. "It made me very careful about who I let close to me. I understand that feeling. Do you?" He thought about Rebecca, about the shock of discovering that their entire relationship had been a performance on her part. "My ex-fiancée was sleeping with a business competitor while we were planning our wedding. She'd been passing him information about my company, my strategies, my vulnerabilities. When I confronted her, she said she had never loved me, just what I could provide. That is horrible." "It was, but it taught me to be more careful about people's motivations." He paused. "Until now." "What is different about now?" "You do not want anything from me except my company. You pay for your own coffee. You bring your own lunch. You choose restaurants I can afford rather than places that would impress you." He smiled. "You are the first person in years who seems more interested in who I am than what I can do for them. Maybe that is because I think who you are is pretty wonderful." The sincerity in her voice made his chest tighten with an emotion he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the calculated hope of a successful business venture, but the wild, irrational hope of genuine human connection. After dinner, they walked slowly back toward their cars, neither wanting the evening to end. The streets were quieter now, lit by old-fashioned street lamps that cast pools of warm light along the sidewalks. "Nathan," Sara said, stopping near a small park where a fountain bubbled softly in the darkness. "Yes. I want you to know that whatever this is between us, it feels different to me, important." She looked down at her hands. "I have not felt this way about anyone in a long time." "Neither have I." When she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm scared of losing it. So am I." This time when he kissed her, it was deeper, more certain. She responded with a passion that matched his own, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she were afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever this is," he said, "I want to find out where it leads. Even if it gets complicated. Especially if it gets complicated." As he drove home that night, Nathaniel realized that for the first time since his parents died, he was not afraid of loving someone. Sara had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years, not just desire, but the capacity for genuine intimacy, the willingness to be known completely by another person. He was falling in love with her, and for once in his adult life, that felt like the smartest decision he had ever made. The charity gala was exactly the kind of event Nathaniel usually attended alone. A glittering display of wealth and social status, where conversations were carefully calculated and everyone had an agenda. But tonight felt different because Sara was beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they moved through the crowd in the hotel ballroom. She looked stunning in a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. He had offered to buy her something more elaborate, but she had declined with a smile that suggested she was more comfortable choosing her own clothes. "This is quite impressive," she said, looking around at the elaborate decorations and formally dressed attendees. "What is the charity again?" "The Henderson Foundation. They provide educational support for underprivileged children." He guided her toward the bar, nodding politely at acquaintances, but not stopping to talk. "I serve on their board." "That must be rewarding work." He considered this as they waited for drinks. Was it rewarding? He wrote large checks and attended meetings, but he rarely thought about the actual children who benefited from the foundation's work. Perhaps that was something he could change. "Sara, there are some people I should introduce you to," he said, spotting several board members across the room. "Are you ready to meet some of my colleagues?" She squeezed his arm. "As ready as I will ever be." The introductions went smoothly at first. Sara was charming and articulate, asking thoughtful questions about the foundation's work and listening with genuine interest to the answers. But Nathaniel noticed the subtle signs of disapproval from some of his peers, the way their eyes lingered on her simple dress, the slightly condescending tone they used when addressing her, the questions designed to highlight their different social backgrounds. "And what do you do, Sara?" asked Margaret Whitfield, the foundation president, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I work in cleaning services," Sara replied without embarrassment. "Commercial buildings downtown." The silence that followed was brief but telling. Nathaniel felt his jaw tighten as he watched people reassess both Sara and his judgment in bringing her. "How interesting," Margaret said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "And how did you two meet?" "Through a mutual friend," Nathaniel said quickly. "Sara volunteers at a literacy center, teaching adults to read. I find her dedication to helping others quite admirable." He emphasized the word admirable while looking directly at Margaret, making it clear that he would not tolerate any disrespect toward his date. The message was received, and the conversation moved to safer topics, but the damage was done. He could see Sara withdrawing slightly, her natural warmth dimmed by the subtle hostility she had encountered. Later, as they sat at their assigned table during dinner, Sara was quieter than usual. The other couples at their table were friendly but clearly belonged to a different social stratum, discussing vacation homes, private schools, and business ventures worth millions of dollars. "Are you all right?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Just taking it all in," she replied, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. During the auction portion of the evening, Nathaniel bid aggressively on several items, partly to support the charity, but mostly to demonstrate his wealth and status to anyone who might question Sara's place beside him. When he won a week-long vacation package to Tuscany with a bid of $50,000, Sara looked at him with surprise. "That was very generous," she said. "It is for a good cause." But he could see that his display of wealth had made her uncomfortable rather than impressed. When they stepped outside for air during a break in the program, she was unusually quiet. "I feel like I am in someone else's life," she said finally, looking out at the city lights from the hotel's terrace. "What do you mean?" "This world, these people, they are very different from what I'm used to." She turned to face him. "I can see how they look at me, Nathan, like I do not belong here. Their opinion does not matter to me, but it matters to them, and probably to you, more than you realize." The truth in her words stung because there was a part of him that had felt embarrassed by the other guests' reactions, even though he knew it was wrong. He had spent years building his reputation and status in this community, and introducing Sara had felt like exposing himself to judgment. "I care about what you think of me," he said, "not what they think." "Do you? Because I saw your face in there, Nathan. You were uncomfortable too." He wanted to deny it, but she deserved honesty. "Maybe I was, a little, but not because of you, because of them, because of how narrow-minded and superficial they can be. Or maybe because you realize that we come from very different worlds, and that matters more than either of us wants to admit." The pain in her voice made him step closer, taking her hands in his. "Sara, listen to me. Yes, we come from different backgrounds. Yes, I have more money than I know what to do with. But that does not change how I feel about you. How do you feel about me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. They had been dancing around the truth for weeks now, both afraid to say the words that would make their connection irrevocable. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply, "with your kindness, your intelligence, your integrity, with the way you see the world and the way you make me want to be better than I am." Tears gathered in her eyes. "Nathan, I know it is complicated. I know there are obstacles we will have to overcome, but I want to try. I want to see where this leads us." She stood on her toes and kissed him, and he could taste the salt of her tears mixed with her sweetness. When they separated, she rested her head against his chest. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I have never wanted anything this much. And I have learned that wanting something this much usually means you are going to lose it." He held her tighter, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "Not this time. This time is different." As they returned to the ballroom, Nathaniel made a decision. He would not let other people's opinions dictate his choices. He would not let fear of social disapproval cost him the first genuine happiness he had found in years. But across the room, a silver-haired man in an expensive tuxedo watched their return with calculating blue eyes. Victor Bell had been observing Nathaniel Ward's romantic entanglement with great interest, and what he had seen tonight suggested that his rival had finally developed a vulnerability worth exploiting. Victor smiled coldly and reached for his phone. It was time to have his private investigator dig a little deeper into the background of Sara Mitchell. After all, everyone had secrets, and Victor Bell was very good at finding them. 3 weeks after the charity gala, Nathaniel found himself doing something he had never done in his adult life, leaving work early on a Tuesday afternoon. Sara had mentioned that she finished her cleaning route by 2 o'clock, and the thought of spending the rest of the day with her was more appealing than reviewing quarterly projections. He found her in the small garden behind her apartment building, kneeling beside a patch of herbs and vegetables she had somehow coaxed from the urban soil. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore old jeans and a cotton shirt that had seen better days. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "This is a surprise," she said, looking up with dirt-smudged cheeks and a smile that made his chest tighten with affection. "I decided life is too short to spend every daylight hour in conference rooms." He sat on the small bench beside her garden plot. "What are you growing?" "Basil, tomatoes, rosemary, things I can use for cooking." She gestured to the neat rows. "My grandmother always said that food tastes better when you grow it yourself." "Tell me about your grandmother." Sara sat back on her heels, a wistful expression crossing her face. "She was the strongest person I ever knew. She taught me that happiness comes from simple things: a good book, a meal shared with someone you care about, the satisfaction of work done with your own hands." "She sounds wonderful. Is she still alive?" "She passed away 5 years ago." Sara's voice grew soft. "Right before I moved here, actually. Losing her was part of what made me realize I needed to figure out who I was on my own terms." Nathaniel wanted to ask what she meant by that, but something in her expression warned him that the topic was still painful. Instead, he helped her finish weeding the garden, content to work beside her in comfortable silence. Later, in her modest apartment, he watched her move around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who genuinely enjoyed cooking. The space was small but warm, filled with books, plants, and photographs of people he assumed were friends from her old life. "You have not told me much about your family," he said, as she stirred something that smelled incredible on the stove. Her hand stilled for just a moment before resuming its circular motion. "There is not much to tell. We are not particularly close." "Any siblings?" One brother, he is different from me. We do not see things the same way." There was something guarded in her tone that made him wonder what kind of family produced someone as warm and genuine as Sara, but left her feeling disconnected from them. He filed the question away for another time, when she might be more willing to share. "What about you?" she asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. "Do you ever think about starting a family of your own?" The question caught him off guard. "I used to. Before Rebecca, I imagined having children, building something lasting with someone I loved." He paused. "After that ended, I convinced myself that I was better off alone. And now I am starting to remember what I was hoping to build in the first place." She turned from the stove to look at him, wooden spoon still in her hand. "Nathan, what are we doing here?" "What do you mean?" "This, us. Where is it going?" Her voice was careful, as if she were afraid of his answer. "Because I need to know if you see this as something temporary, or if you think it could be more." He stood and crossed to her, taking the spoon from her hand and setting it on the counter. When he cupped her face in his palms, he could feel the rapid beat of her pulse against his fingertips. "Sara, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want this to be more. I want everything with you, even though we come from different worlds. Especially because we come from different worlds. You make me remember what actually matters." When she kissed him, it was with a desperation that spoke of her own fears and hopes. He could taste the uncertainty on her lips, the way she held back even as she gave herself to him. As they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I am so afraid of losing you," she whispered. "You are not going to lose me." But even as he said the words, he wondered what secret she was carrying that made her so certain that happiness was temporary. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private, but Sara's carefully maintained distance from her family and her fear of being known completely suggested something more significant than simple embarrassment. It did not matter, he told himself, as they ate dinner by candlelight. Whatever she was protecting, whatever she was afraid to tell him, he would prove that his love was strong enough to withstand any revelation. He had no way of knowing that across the city, Victor Bell was reviewing a private investigator's preliminary report that would change everything. The thunderstorm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke as Nathaniel and Sara reached his penthouse apartment. She had never seen his home before, and he felt uncharacteristically nervous as the elevator climbed toward the 30th floor. "I should probably warn you," he said as the doors opened directly into his living space. "It is not very lived in." Sara stepped into the apartment and turned in a slow circle, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek, modern furniture, the complete absence of anything personal or warm. "It is beautiful," she said diplomatically, "but sterile. I was going to say carefully curated." She moved toward the windows where the storm was putting on a dramatic display over the city. "The view is incredible. I bought it for the view. Sometimes I stand here and watch the world go by, wondering what all those people down there are doing with their lives. And what do you usually conclude? That most of them probably have something I do not, which is someone to share it with." Sara turned from the window to study his face. "You have been alone for a long time, have not you?" "By choice, mostly. After Rebecca, it seemed safer to keep my distance." He joined her at the window, watching lightning illuminate the storm clouds. "But safety is overrated." "Is it? With you, it is." The power went out suddenly, plunging the apartment into darkness, broken only by the intermittent flash of lightning. Sara moved closer to him instinctively, and he put his arms around her. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked. "No." "Are you?" "Only the emotional kind." She laughed softly, and the sound made something loosen in his chest. "I think we are in the middle of one of those right now. Are you afraid?" Terrified, she admitted, but also more alive than I have felt in years. In the darkness, with the storm raging outside and Sara warm in his arms, Nathaniel felt the last of his emotional barriers crumble. This woman had become essential to him in a way that should have been frightening, but instead felt like coming home. "Sara," he said against her hair. I love you." She pulled back to look at him, her face illuminated by a flash of lightning. "I love you too, Nathan. More than I ever thought possible." "Then why do you look so sad when you say it?" "Because loving someone this much means they have the power to destroy you. I would never hurt you intentionally. I know. But sometimes, the worst pain comes from good people making impossible choices." Before he could ask what she meant by that, she was kissing him with a passion that drove all other thoughts from his mind. This time, there was no hesitation, no careful distance. She kissed him as if she were memorizing the taste of him, as if she were afraid this might be their last chance. When the kiss ended, they were both breathing hard. The storm outside seemed to match the intensity of what was building between them. "Stay with me tonight," he said. "Nathan, not for anything you are not ready for. Just stay. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms and wake up knowing you are here." She nodded, and he led her to his bedroom, where they lay together fully clothed on top of the covers, listening to the storm and talking in whispers about everything and nothing. She told him about books that had changed her life, about places she wanted to travel, about dreams she had never shared with anyone else. "I used to think I wanted a big life," she said, as the storm finally began to move away. "Excitement, adventure, all the things you read about in novels, but lying here with you, I realize that this might be enough. This quiet happiness. Just this. This is everything." As Sara fell asleep in his arms, Nathaniel stared at the ceiling and tried to identify the feeling that was growing stronger each day. It was not just love. It was the conviction that he had found the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The woman who had appeared in his carefully ordered world and shown him what he had been missing. He was ready to ask her to marry him. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it felt like the most natural decision he had ever made. Tomorrow he would start looking for a ring, something simple and beautiful, like Sara herself. In her sleep, she murmured something he could not quite catch, but her hand tightened on his shirt as if she were holding on to him. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head and closed his eyes, more content than he had ever been in his life. Neither of them knew that 15 floors below, in the building's parking garage, a photographer with a telephoto lens was reviewing the images he had captured through the penthouse windows before the storm hit. The photographs would be on Victor Bell's desk first thing in the morning, along with a report that would give him everything he needed to destroy Nathaniel Ward's happiness. The storm outside had passed, but the real tempest was just beginning. The community center where Sara volunteered was nothing like the sleek charitable organizations where Nathaniel usually wrote checks. Located in a converted warehouse, it buzzed with activity on Saturday morning. Children playing in one corner while their parents attended English classes, teenagers working on computers, elderly people gathered around tables for what looked like a book discussion. "This is where you teach people to read?" Nathaniel asked as Sara led him through the controlled chaos. "One of the places? We serve anyone who needs help, adults who never had the chance to finish school, immigrants learning English, kids who need tutoring." She waved at a woman organizing art supplies. "Carmen, this is Nathan, the friend I told you about." Carmen looked him up and down with frank assessment. "So you are the one who has been making our Sara smile so much lately." "I hope so," Nathaniel replied, and Carmen's expression warmed slightly. "Sara, your 2 o'clock student is already here. James has been practicing all week." Sara excused herself to work with James, a man in his 60s who had never learned to read as a child and was now determined to master the skill so he could help his grandson with homework. Nathaniel watched through the glass-walled classroom as Sara patiently guided James through a simple story, her face lighting up each time he successfully sounded out a difficult word. "She is something special, is not she?" Carmen had appeared beside him. "Yes, she is. You know, she has been volunteering here for 2 years, but she never talks about her life before she came to the city. Some people, they like to share their whole story right away. Others, they keep their past locked up tight." Carmen gave him a meaningful look. "Makes you wonder what they are protecting. Maybe they are protecting themselves, or maybe they are protecting someone else." Carmen studied his face. "You seem like a good man, Nathan. But good men can get hurt too when people are not honest about who they really are." Before Nathaniel could respond, Sara emerged from the classroom with James, who was beaming with pride over his progress. "Mr. Nathan," James said, "Sara tells me you work in business. You must be very smart." "Not as smart as Sara," Nathaniel replied truthfully. After leaving the community center, they walked through the neighborhood, which was a mix of gentrification and urban decay. Sara moved through it with easy familiarity, greeting shopkeepers and street vendors who clearly knew her well. "You seem to know everyone here," Nathaniel observed. "I like getting to know the people in my community. There are so many interesting stories." She stopped at a fruit stand run by an elderly Korean woman who immediately began pressing samples on both of them. "Mrs. Park came here 40 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now she has 3 children who are doctors and lawyers." As they continued walking, Nathaniel noticed the way Sara's eyes lit up when she talked about the people in her adopted neighborhood. She knew which teenager was struggling in school, which family was dealing with a medical crisis, which elderly person needed someone to check on them. It was a level of community involvement that impressed and humbled him. "How do you know so much about everyone's lives?" he asked. "I pay attention, I listen. Most people just want someone to see them, to acknowledge that their struggles and victories matter. Is that what you wanted? Someone to see you?" She was quiet for a long moment as they walked. "I used to think I wanted to be invisible," she said finally. "It seemed safer that way. But you make me want to be seen." "What made you think invisibility was safer?" "Experience." The sadness in her voice made him want to pull her into his arms, right there on the sidewalk. "People can only hurt you if they know where to aim." "Sara, what happened to you?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. They were standing in front of a small church whose bells were chiming the hour, and the sound seemed to emphasize the weight of the moment. "Someone I trusted used everything I told him against me. He made me feel foolish for believing that someone could love me for who I am, rather than what I could do for them. I am not that person. I know. That is what scares me." "Why does that scare you?" "Because if I trust you completely and you leave, I do not think I could survive it." Nathaniel took her hands, not caring that they were standing in the middle of the sidewalk with people walking around them. "Sara, look at me." She met his eyes reluctantly. "I am not going anywhere. Whatever secret you think you are keeping, whatever part of your past you are afraid to share with me, it does not matter. Nothing could make me stop loving you." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You do not know what you are saying." "Yes, I do. I know exactly what I am saying." She searched his face as if looking for signs of uncertainty or deception. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her, because she stood on her toes and kissed him softly. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "More than you could possibly know." As they walked back toward her apartment, Nathaniel felt the satisfaction of someone who had just made an important breakthrough. Sara was learning to trust him, learning to believe that his love was genuine and lasting. Whatever shadows from her past were making her so cautious, he would prove to her that she was safe with him. What he did not know was that 3 blocks behind them, A private investigator was photographing their every move and documenting Sara's interactions with the community members who knew her as a dedicated volunteer rather than the European heiress she actually was. The web of secrets that Sara had so carefully constructed was about to unravel. And when it did, both their worlds would be turned upside down. The inconsistencies started small. A wine recommendation that seemed beyond Sara's supposed budget and knowledge. A casual reference to a European art exhibition she could not possibly have attended. The way she instinctively knew which fork to use during a formal dinner. Despite claiming she was unfamiliar with such settings, Nathaniel noticed but chose not to comment. Everyone had hidden depths, experiences that shaped their knowledge in unexpected ways. If Sara had secrets, she would share them when she was ready, but the questions multiplied over the following weeks. "You seem to know a lot about international finance," he observed one evening as they watched the news together in his apartment. A story about European markets had prompted her to make several sophisticated observations about currency fluctuations and trade agreements. Sara paused, as if realizing she had revealed more than intended. "I read a lot. Economics fascinates me. What else fascinates you that I do not know about? Art history, architecture, the way cities evolve over centuries." She curled up beside him on the couch. "I used to dream about traveling through Europe, seeing all the places I had only read about. Used to. Now I dream about other things, such as building a life with someone I love, finding purpose in simple things, being part of a community that matters." The longing in her voice was genuine, but Nathaniel sensed layers of complexity beneath her words. Sometimes when Sara thought he was not looking, he caught glimpses of a sadness that seemed too deep for someone who had lived the straightforward life she described. The next morning, as Sara was getting ready for work, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the bathroom and closing the door. Nathaniel could not hear the words, but the tone of her voice suggested tension, maybe even fear. When she emerged 15 minutes later, she looked shaken. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Family issues? Nothing serious?" But her smile did not reach her eyes, and her hands were trembling slightly as she gathered her things. "Sara, if you need to talk, I am fine, really. Just some complicated family dynamics I prefer not to think about." After she left, Nathaniel found himself staring at the door she had closed so firmly behind her. The woman he loved was carrying burdens she would not share with him, and his inability to help was beginning to eat at him. That evening, Marcus stopped by the office with Chinese takeout and the determined expression of a man who intended to have a serious conversation. "You look like hell," Marcus announced, setting the food on Nathaniel's desk. "Thank you for that astute observation." "What is wrong?" "I thought things were going well with Sara." "They are. That is the problem." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "I am falling in love with someone who is afraid to let me really know her. She has secrets, Marcus, important ones, and I do not know whether to push for answers or give her space." "What kind of secrets?" "I have no idea. But sometimes she says things that do not match the life she has described. Sometimes she gets phone calls that clearly upset her. Sometimes she looks at me like she is waiting for me to disappear." "Have you asked her directly?" "I have tried. She deflects or changes the subject." Nathaniel opened one of the takeout containers without really seeing what was inside. "I told her that nothing could make me stop loving her, but I think she believes I do not mean it." "Do you mean it?" The question was simple, but the answer was not. "I thought I did." "But what if her secret is something that changes everything? What if the woman I think I am in love with is not who she really is? Then you will have to decide whether you love her enough to find out who she really is." That night, alone in his penthouse, Nathaniel considered Marcus's words. He had built his life on careful analysis, calculated risks, informed decisions. But love was none of those things. Love required faith, the willingness to trust someone with your heart, even when you could not predict the outcome. Sara was asking him to love her without knowing her completely. The question was whether he was brave enough to take that leap. 3 miles away in her modest apartment, Sara stared at her phone, wrestling with a decision that grew more difficult each day. The call that morning had been from her family's attorney, warning her that someone had been asking questions about her background, her finances, her reasons for leaving Europe. Someone knew she was not Sara Mitchell, cleaning lady from a small town. Someone was investigating Serafina Dubois, heiress to one of Europe's largest fortunes. She could disappear tonight, change her name again, move to another city, start over somewhere else. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice, but it would also mean losing Nathan, the first man who had ever loved her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. The irony was devastating. She had found genuine love by pretending to be someone else, and now the pretense threatened to destroy everything she had built. As she sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by the life she had carefully constructed, Sara faced the truth she had been avoiding for months. She could not keep living this lie. Either she had to trust Nathan with the truth, or she had to let him go. Neither option seemed survivable. But in a luxury hotel across town, Victor Bell was reviewing the final pages of his investigator's report with deep satisfaction. Miss Sara Mitchell was actually Miss Serafina Dubois, and her family fortune made Nathaniel's wealth look modest by comparison. Victor smiled as he reached for his phone. It was time to arrange a meeting with the social media coordinator for next week's charity gala. He had some wonderful news to share about one of their most generous anonymous donors. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it at the moment of maximum impact. The charity gala at the Riverside Hotel promised to be the social event of the season. As chairman of this year's fundraising committee, Victor Bell had spared no expense in creating an evening that would be remembered long after the last champagne glass was cleared away. Standing in the grand ballroom as final preparations were completed, Victor allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white silk, floral arrangements that had cost more than most people earned in a month, and a stage where he would soon deliver the most important speech of his career. "Everything looks perfect, Mr. Bell," his assistant reported. "The media is set up in the designated area, and we have confirmed attendance from all the major society reporters." "Excellent. And our special guest presentation is ready. The slides are loaded, and the photographer has provided some beautiful images of Miss Dubois at various charitable events. The story of revealing our mystery donor should generate wonderful publicity for the foundation." If only she knew, Victor thought, what kind of publicity this would actually generate. Across the city, Nathaniel stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie with hands that were slightly unsteady. Tonight felt significant in a way he could not fully explain. Sara had seemed nervous all week, distracted and jumpy, as if she were wrestling with some internal battle. "You look very handsome," Sara said from the bedroom doorway. She was wearing the same simple black dress from their first gala together, but she'd done something different with her hair, sweeping it into an elegant updo that made her look almost regal. "You look beautiful," he replied, meaning it completely. "Are you feeling all right? You seem tense." "Just not looking forward to another evening of feeling like I do not belong." "You belong with me. That is all that matters." She smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes. "Nathan, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you discovered that everything you thought you knew about someone was wrong, could you forgive them?" The question was so unexpected that he turned from the mirror to face her fully. "That depends. Were they lying to hurt me, or were they lying to protect themselves? What if it was both? What if protecting themselves meant deceiving you about something fundamental? Sara, what are you trying to tell me? For a moment, she looked as if she might speak, might finally share whatever secret she had been carrying. Then she shook her head and forced a brighter smile. Nothing specific. I was just thinking about trust and honesty and how complicated they can be. As they rode to the hotel in the back of a taxi, Sara was quieter than usual. Nathaniel found himself studying her profile in the passing streetlights, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept touching her necklace, a simple chain he had never seen her wear before. "Sara," he said quietly. "Yes? Whatever you are afraid to tell me, whenever you are ready to tell me, I will listen without judgment." She turned to look at him then, and he was startled by the pain in her eyes. "You might not feel that way after tonight." "Why? What happens tonight?" "I do not know, but I have a feeling that everything is about to change." The Riverside Hotel was ablaze with lights when they arrived, photographers capturing images of arriving guests, valets managing a steady stream of luxury cars. As they walked into the lobby, Sara's steps slowed. "Maybe we should leave," she said suddenly. "Leave. We just got here. I have a bad feeling about tonight, Nathan. Something is wrong." Before he could respond, Marcus appeared at his elbow. "There you are. Victor Bell has been asking about you all evening. Apparently he has some kind of special announcement planned." Nathaniel felt Sara go rigid beside him. "What kind of announcement?" she asked. "Something about honoring the Foundation's most generous anonymous donor. Should be quite a moment." Marcus looked pleased. "It is nice to see philanthropy being recognized publicly for once." The color drained from Sara's face so completely that Nathaniel was afraid she might faint. "Sara, what is wrong? We have to go, right now." "Go? Why?" But before she could answer, Victor Bell's voice boomed across the ballroom from the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, see if I could have your attention, please. We have a very special surprise this evening." Sara's hand gripped Nathaniel's arm with desperate strength. "Please," she whispered. "Please, let us just leave." But it was too late. The crowd was already moving toward the stage, and Victor's voice was filling the room with practiced authority. "Tonight, we have the rare privilege of recognizing someone who has preferred to remain anonymous in her generosity. A young woman whose contributions to children's charities across 2 continents have been extraordinary." Nathaniel felt Sara begin to tremble beside him. Around them, the crowd murmured with interest and anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor continued, his eyes finding Sara in the crowd with laser precision, "please join me in thanking Miss Serafina Dubois, heir to the Dubois European fortune and our mystery benefactor, for her incredible generosity." The spotlight found Sara instantly, illuminating her pale face and wide, terrified eyes as 500 people turned to stare at the woman Nathaniel had known as a humble cleaning lady. The woman who was apparently one of the wealthiest people in Europe. The woman who had been lying to him about everything. The silence in the ballroom stretched like a held breath before exploding into chaos. Camera flashes erupted like lightning as reporters pushed forward. Guests whispered frantically to each other, and Victor Bell smiled from the stage with the satisfaction of a man who had just delivered a perfectly calculated blow. Nathaniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Serafina Dubois, European fortune. The woman beside him, trembling under the harsh spotlight, was not Sara Mitchell at all. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing commotion, "I can explain." But he could not hear her over the roaring in his ears, the sound of his entire reality crumbling around him. Every conversation they had shared, every moment of intimacy, every declaration of love, all of it built on a lie so fundamental that he felt sick. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor continued from the stage, his voice cutting through the noise. Miss Dubois has been supporting our foundation anonymously for over 2 years. Her family's charitable trust has donated over $15 million to children's causes worldwide. $15 million. Nathaniel looked at the woman he had thought he knew, the woman who had let him pay for modest dinners, who had worried about her cleaning job, who had claimed to understand the struggles of working-class life and felt something die inside his chest. "How long?" he asked, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside him. "Nathan, please, not here. How long have you been lying to me?" The reporters were getting closer now, their cameras and microphones thrust forward like weapons. Serafina, whoever she was, looked around desperately, trapped in the spotlight with nowhere to run. "Since the beginning," she admitted, the words so quiet he almost could not hear them. "Since the first night we met." The confession hit him like a physical blow. Every memory they had shared was suddenly suspect, every vulnerable moment tainted by deception. The woman who had taught him to value authenticity over wealth had been living the most elaborate lie imaginable. "Miss Dubois," a reporter called out, "can you comment on your relationship with Mr. Ward? Was he aware of your true identity?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Nathaniel found himself the focus of speculation and pity, the naive CEO who had been fooled by a billionaire heiress playing dress-up in his world. "I need air," he said, turning toward the exit. "Nathan, wait!" Serafina caught his arm, but he pulled away from her touch as if it burned. Do not touch me right now." The hurt in her eyes was immediate and devastating, but he could not bring himself to care. She had forfeited the right to his concern when she had chosen deception over truth for months. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the questions shouted by reporters, the concerned voices of friends and colleagues. Behind him, he could hear Serafina trying to follow, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. The hotel's garden was blessedly empty, the cool night air a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom. Nathaniel loosened his bow tie and tried to make sense of what had just happened. "Nathan, please let me explain." Serafina had followed him outside, her elegant facade cracking under the weight of her desperation. "Explain what?" "That you have been lying to me every single day for months. That everything I thought I knew about you was fabricated." He turned to face her, and she flinched at whatever she saw in his expression. What was this, some kind of game? Rich girls slumming with the middle class? No, it was never like that. Then what was it like? Because from where I stand, it looks like you have been playing an elaborate joke at my expense. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to fall in love with you. Fall in love? The laugh that escaped him was bitter and hollow. How can you fall in love with someone when everything about yourself is a lie? How can I fall in love with someone who does not actually exist? Tears were streaming down her face now, destroying her carefully applied makeup and revealing the raw pain beneath. "I exist, Nathan. My feelings for you are real. Everything between us has been real. Everything between us has been based on a lie. That is not true. Is not it? You let me take you to modest restaurants because you thought it was charming to date someone beneath your social class. You let me pay for dinners that cost less than you probably spend on coffee. You listened to me worry about business problems that are insignificant compared to managing a European fortune. I never looked down on you. Never. No, then why the charade? Why not just tell me who you were from the beginning?" She wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. "Because every time I have ever told someone the truth about my wealth, it changed everything. They either wanted to use me or they were intimidated by me, but none of them ever saw me. So you decided to see if I would fall for your alter ego instead. I decided to see if someone could love me for who I am instead of what I have. But who you are includes what you have, your wealth, your family, your background. That is part of you. By hiding it, you made it impossible for me to love the real you." The truth of his words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto a nearby bench, her elegant posture finally crumbling under the weight of her deception. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what? Afraid that if you knew the truth, you would see me differently. Afraid that you would want me for my money instead of myself. Afraid that I would lose the only genuine connection I have ever had. Instead, you lost it anyway." She looked up at him with eyes that held a pain so deep it almost made him want to comfort her. Almost, "Can you ever forgive me?" she asked. Nathaniel looked at this woman who had become the center of his world, who had taught him to value authenticity above all else while living the most inauthentic existence imaginable. The irony was so perfect it was almost beautiful. "I do not know," he said honestly. "Right now, I do not even know who you are." Without another word, he walked back toward the hotel, leaving her alone in the garden with the ruins of everything they had built together. As he reached the ballroom, he could see Victor Bell still holding court on the stage, fielding questions from reporters about the evening's dramatic revelation. Their eyes met across the room, and Victor's smile was one of pure triumph. Nathaniel understood now that this had been orchestrated, that Victor had somehow discovered Serafina's secret and chosen to weaponize it at the moment of maximum impact. The realization should have made him angry at Victor, but all he could feel was emptiness. The woman he loved did not exist. She never had. And somehow, that hurt more than any business rival's revenge ever could. The financial headlines were brutal. Tech CEO duped by billionaire heiress. Nathaniel Ward's romantic humiliation exposed. When love meets lies, a modern deception. Nathaniel sat in his office at 6 in the morning, surrounded by newspapers and printouts of online articles, each one dissecting his personal life with the precision of a surgical blade. The story had gone viral overnight. The naive executive who had fallen for an elaborate charade. The European heiress who had played dress-up in his world. His phone had been ringing constantly, reporters wanting statements, business associates offering awkward sympathy, board members concerned about the company's public image. He had turned it off hours ago, unable to bear another well-meaning conversation about his unfortunate situation. Sara Chen, his chief technology officer, knocked on his office door. "Nathaniel, I brought coffee." He gestured for her to enter, though he did not look up from the newspaper spread across his desk. Sara had been with the company since its early days, one of the few people who had earned his complete trust and respect. "How bad is it?" he asked. "The media attention. It will pass. These stories always do." Sara set the coffee on his desk and settled into the chair across from him. "The real question is how bad it is for you personally." For the first time in 18 hours, Nathaniel looked up. Sara's expression was kind but direct, the same look she wore when debugging particularly complex problems. "I do not know," he admitted. "I keep replaying every conversation we had, every moment we shared, looking for clues I missed. Was any of it real? What do you think?" "I think I fell in love with someone who does not exist. Or maybe you fell in love with someone who was too afraid to exist authentically." The observation surprised him with its gentleness. "Are you defending her?" "I am trying to understand her, and maybe help you understand her too." Sara leaned forward. "Nathaniel, you have spent years being careful about people's motivations, protecting yourself from users and gold diggers. What if she was doing exactly the same thing, by lying to me for months? By trying to find out if someone could love her without the complication of her wealth?" Sara paused. "Is not that exactly what you would want? To be loved for who you are, rather than what you have? But she made that choice for me. She decided I could not handle the truth." Did she? Or did she panic when she realized she was falling in love and did not know how to untangle the lie from the relationship? Nathaniel considered this as he stared out his office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Serafina was dealing with her own version of this public humiliation, her own regrets and recriminations. "Even if that is true," he said finally. "How do you build trust with someone who has been deceiving you since the day you met?" "I do not know. But I know that the Nathaniel Ward I have worked with for 8 years is not someone who gives up when something is difficult." After Sara left, Nathaniel found himself thinking about the woman he had known as Sara. Not the heiress who had been exposed on stage, but the woman who had taught adults to read on weekends, who had grown herbs in a tiny garden, who had cooked for him with her own hands. That woman had been real. Her kindness to strangers, her passion for helping others, her genuine interest in his thoughts and dreams, those things could not have been fabricated. The deception had been about her circumstances, not her character. But was that enough? Could love survive when its foundation had been built on lies? 3 miles away, in the elegant suite at the Four Seasons where she had been hiding since the gala, Serafina Dubois stared at the same headlines with a different kind of despair. The media had painted her as a calculating socialite who had played cruel games with an honest man's heart. They were not entirely wrong. Her phone calls from family and advisors had been a mixture of concern and criticism. Her parents were flying in from France. Her brother Philippe was handling damage control with the European press. And her family's public relations firm was crafting statements about charitable giving and privacy rights, but none of them addressed the real problem. She had lost the only genuine love she had ever known because she had been too afraid to trust it with the truth. A soft knock at her door interrupted her brooding. "Room service," a voice called. She had not ordered anything, but when she opened the door, Carmen from the community center stood in the hallway with a thermos of soup and a bag that smelled like fresh bread. "How did you get up here?" Serafina asked. "I told them I was your sister. Rich people believe what they want to believe." Carmen pushed past her into the suite. "You look terrible. Thank you for that honest assessment. Sit down, eat something, then we are going to talk." As Carmen bustled around the suite, setting out soup and sandwiches, Serafina felt the first genuine comfort she had experienced since the nightmare began. Here was someone who had known her as Sara, who had seen her dedication to the community, who might understand the complexity of what she had done. "Why did you not tell him?" Carmen asked without preamble. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That he would see me differently. That he would want me for my money instead of myself. That I would lose the only authentic connection I had ever had." Serafina's voice broke on the last words. "So instead you lost it anyway." The brutal truth of the statement made Serafina flinch. "Yes. Honey, let me tell you something about fear. It makes us do stupid things to protect ourselves, but most of the time we end up causing the exact pain we were trying to avoid. I know that now. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Serafina looked around the luxurious suite. All marble and silk and expensive emptiness. "I could disappear again, change my name, move somewhere else, start over." "You could. Is that what you want?" "I want Nathan back. But I do not think he can ever forgive me." "Have you asked him?" "He made it very clear that he does not even know who I am anymore." Carmen sat down beside her on the sofa. "Sara, Serafina, whoever you are, listen to me. That man came to the community center and watched you teach James to read. He looked at you like you were the sun and the moon and all the stars put together. That was not fake. But everything else was. No, everything else was complicated. There is a difference." That evening, alone again in her suite, Serafina made a decision. She could not undo the deception, but she could stop hiding from its consequences. She could face the truth of what she had done and who she really was. For the first time in her adult life, she would have to be completely authentic, even if it cost her everything she had left to lose. The next morning, she would begin the hardest battle of her life. The fight to prove that love could survive even the most devastating betrayal, if both people were brave enough to rebuild it from the ground up. The small church where Nathaniel's parents had been married was empty on Thursday afternoon, filled only with colored light from stained glass windows and the kind of silence that invited reflection. He had not been here since their funeral 13 years ago, but today he needed a place where he could think without interruption. He sat in the same pew where he had sat as a child, listening to sermons about forgiveness and redemption that had seemed abstract then but felt painfully relevant now. His parents had been good people, not perfect, but honest in their flaws and generous with their love. What would they think of the man he had become? What would they think of the situation he found himself in? "I thought I might find you here." Marcus's voice echoed softly in the empty sanctuary. Nathaniel did not turn around as his friend slid into the pew beside him. "How did you know? You always came here when you needed to figure things out. After your parents died, after the Rebecca situation, after you started the company." Marcus followed Nathaniel's gaze toward the altar. "What are you trying to figure out this time? Whether I am a fool or a victim? Whether what Sara and I had was real or just an elaborate lie? Whether I can ever trust anyone again?" Those are big questions. They deserve big answers. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the play of light across the church walls. "Can I tell you something about the night I introduced you to? What about it? I lied to you both." Nathaniel finally turned to look at his friend. "What do you mean?" "I told you she was a cleaning lady who did not know who you were. I told her you were a business consultant who worked too much and needed someone to remind him how to live. Neither description was completely true." "Marcus, let me finish. I knew she was hiding something significant about her background. I suspected you would be intimidated by her if you knew the whole truth. So I simplified both of your stories and hoped you would find each other despite the complications. You set us up to lie to each other. I set you up to connect as people instead of as resumes." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "And it worked, did not it? You fell in love with who she was, not what she had. She fell in love with your character, not your success." Nathaniel felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. "So everyone has been lying to me, or everyone has been trying to protect something precious that might have been destroyed by too much truth too soon. That is not the same thing, is not it?" Marcus leaned back against the pew. "Nathaniel, you have been protecting yourself from gold diggers and users for years. You are careful about who gets close to you, careful about what you reveal, careful about vulnerability. How is that different from what she was doing? I was not pretending to be someone else entirely. Were not you. The man I saw with Sara was different from the man you have been for the past 3 years. He was warmer, more open, more willing to take risks. Was that the real you, or was that a version of yourself you created for her?" The question hit harder than Nathaniel wanted to admit. The man who had fallen in love with Sara had been a version of himself he had almost forgotten existed. Someone capable of spontaneity and vulnerability, someone who valued connection over control. "Maybe we were both pretending," he said, finally. "Or maybe you were both becoming who you actually wanted to be." After Marcus left, Nathaniel sat alone in the church as afternoon light slowly faded to evening. He thought about the woman he had known as Sara, her genuine tears when he talked about his parents, her passion for helping others learn to read, her fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. How much of that had been real? The answer, he realized, was probably all of it. The deception had been about her circumstances, not her heart. She had hidden her wealth, but not her character, her background, but not her capacity for love. The question that remained was whether he could forgive her for making that choice without consulting him. Whether he could rebuild trust with someone who had started their relationship with such a fundamental lie. As he finally stood to leave, Nathaniel caught sight of a memorial plaque near the altar, "In memory of all who sought redemption and found grace." His parents had believed in second chances, in the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. Maybe it was time to find out if he had inherited their faith in redemption. That night, he did something he had not done since the night at the hotel. He looked up everything he could find about Serafina Dubois. The articles painted a picture of a woman who had inherited extraordinary wealth but used it responsibly. Charitable foundations, educational initiatives, environmental causes. Her money had gone toward making the world better, not just making her life more comfortable. There were also older articles, from about 5 years ago, about a highly publicized relationship that had ended badly when her fiancé was discovered selling information about her family's business interests to competitors. The betrayal had been front-page news in European society magazines. No wonder she had been afraid to trust him with the truth. Her last experience with honesty and love had nearly destroyed her family's company, and certainly destroyed her faith in genuine connection. For the first time since the night at the hotel, Nathaniel felt something other than anger toward the woman who had deceived him. He felt understanding, and with understanding came the possibility of forgiveness. The coffee shop where they had first met seemed smaller than Nathaniel remembered, more fragile somehow, as if the weight of what had happened between them might crush its modest walls. He arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the same corner booth where Sara had been reading poetry that first night, when the world had seemed full of possibility. She appeared in the doorway exactly on time, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that reminded him of the woman he had first fallen in love with. But there were differences too, a wariness in her posture, shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult reckonings. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Thank you for asking." The waitress who had served them on their first date approached with a smile that faded when she recognized them. The story of their deception had been covered extensively in local media, and Nathaniel realized they would probably never again be just another couple sharing coffee. "The usual?" the waitress asked carefully. "Please, Serafina said softly. When they were alone again, silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you an explanation. You owe me the truth. I am not sure that is the same thing." She nodded, accepting the distinction. "My name is Serafina Marie Dubois. I am 30 years old. My family owns luxury goods companies across Europe, and I inherited control of several charitable trusts when my grandmother died 5 years ago." "Why did you come to America?" "I was engaged to a man I thought I loved, Jean-Luc Moreau. We had known each other since childhood, and I believed our connection was real." She paused to steady her voice. "I discovered he had been sharing details about my family's business strategies with our competitors, using our relationship to gather intelligence. When I confronted him, he said he had never loved me, just what I represented. So you decided to find out if someone could love you without knowing what you represented." "I decided to become someone who could not be used." Sara Mitchell had no family wealth to exploit, no business connections to leverage, no reason to be pursued except for herself. Nathaniel studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What he found instead was exhaustion and genuine remorse. How much of Sara was real? All of her feelings, her love for you, her hope that you could build something authentic together, her terror at the thought of losing you. Serafina's voice broke slightly. The only things that were not real were her circumstances. Those circumstances matter, Serafina. They are part of who you are. I know that now. But I was so afraid that they would become all you could see. Their coffee arrived, and both of them stared into their cups as if looking for answers in the dark liquid. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "I have been trying to understand why you thought I would only want you for your money. Because everyone else has. I am not everyone else. I know that now too, but fear makes people do foolish things. Yes, it does. He met her eyes. I was afraid too, Serafina. Afraid of being vulnerable again. Afraid of being used again. Afraid of letting someone matter enough to hurt me. Maybe that is why I fell so hard for Sara. She felt safe because she seemed to need nothing from me. But I did need things from you. I needed your kindness, your acceptance, your ability to see good in people. I needed you to teach me how to trust again, and I needed you to teach me how to live again. The admission hung between them, fragile and tentative. For the first time since the hotel, Nathaniel allowed himself to remember not just the betrayal, but the love that had preceded it. "Can you ever forgive me?" she asked. "I do not know, but I want to try." Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle in darkness. What would that look like? Honesty, complete honesty, even when it is difficult, even when it is scary. Can you promise me the same thing? No more careful distance, no more emotional walls. That terrifies me. It terrifies me too. They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the magnitude of what they were considering, starting over, but this time as their authentic selves, with all the complications and vulnerabilities that entailed. "There is something else you need to know," Serafina said finally. "Victor Bell orchestrated the revelation at the hotel. He had been investigating me for weeks, looking for a way to hurt you." Nathaniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "Why?" "Because 3 years ago, you exposed his use of substandard materials in a government contract bid. It cost him $300 million and damaged his reputation with several major clients. So he decided to use you to get revenge. He used my secret as a weapon against both of us. And he succeeded. What do you want to do about that? I want to make sure he never has the power to destroy anyone else's happiness for his own satisfaction." For the first time in days, Nathaniel felt something other than pain or confusion. He felt determination. "Then let us make sure he faces consequences for what he did." As they left the coffee shop together, walking slowly toward their separate cars, Nathaniel realized that revenge against Victor was only part of what he wanted. More than that, he wanted to find out if love could be rebuilt on a foundation of complete truth. It would be the hardest thing either of them had ever attempted, but for the first time since the night at the hotel, it felt possible. The law offices of Morrison, Chen and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of a downtown skyscraper, all glass and polished wood, and the kind of understated elegance that signaled serious money and serious consequences. Nathaniel and Serafina sat side by side in the conference room, their relationship still fragile but their purpose unified. "The evidence is quite comprehensive," said Helen Morrison, the senior partner who specialized in corporate malfeasance and privacy violations. She spread documents across the mahogany table like a general planning a campaign. "Mr. Bell hired Blackstone Investigations to conduct what he termed due diligence on your personal life, Mr. Ward. But the scope of their investigation went far beyond anything that could be considered legitimate business intelligence." "What exactly did they do?" Serafina asked. "They accessed your financial records through fraudulent means, conducted surveillance of your personal activities, and bribed service workers to provide information about your daily routines." Helen's expression was grim. "Most damaging from a legal standpoint, they used illegally obtained information about Miss Dubois' charitable giving to identify her real identity." "Is that enough to pursue charges?" Nathaniel asked. "Corporate espionage, invasion of privacy, fraud. Yes, I believe we have grounds for both civil and criminal actions." Helen leaned back in her chair. "But there is another dimension to consider. Mr. Bell's use of a charitable event as the platform for exposing private information may constitute abuse of his position as a board member, meaning the Henderson Foundation could face scrutiny from regulators about how donor information is protected if it comes out that a board member used his position to access and exploit confidential donor records. The foundation could lose its charitable status. Serafina paled. I do not want to hurt the foundation. Their work with children is too important. That may not be your choice to make, Helen said gently. When someone weaponizes a charitable organization for personal vendetta, there are systemic consequences. Over the next 2 hours, they built a comprehensive case against Victor Bell. The evidence was damning, a clear pattern of using private investigators and insider access to destroy business rivals through personal attacks. Nathaniel was not Victor's first victim, just his most recent. There are at least 3 other executives who can testify to similar treatment, Helen explained. In each case, Mr. Bell used personal information as leverage in business disputes. One man lost his marriage when Bell orchestrated the revelation of a decades-old affair. Another lost a major client after Bell exposed his daughter's struggles with addiction. He destroys people, Serafina said quietly. He destroys families, Nathaniel corrected, and he has been getting away with it because his victims were too humiliated or too damaged to fight back. But you are going to fight back, Helen observed. We are going to make sure he cannot do this to anyone else, Serafina confirmed. As they left the law office, Nathaniel and Serafina walked in comfortable silence toward the elevator. Their relationship was still undefined, still healing, but they had found common ground in their desire for justice. Are you ready for this to get ugly? Nathaniel asked as they waited for the elevator. It is already ugly. Now, we are just making sure it gets ugly for the right person. Victor will not go down quietly. He will try to use our relationship against us, try to make it look like a lover's quarrel disguised as a legal case. Let him try. The evidence speaks for itself. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside together. As they descended toward the street, Nathaniel found himself studying Serafina's reflection in the polished metal doors. She looked determined, resolved. Nothing like the terrified woman who had been exposed on stage a week ago. You have changed, he said. How? You seem stronger, more yourself. I am tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. She met his eyes in the reflection. I spent 5 years trying to protect myself from being hurt again, and I ended up hurting the person I love most. Fear is not protection. It is just another kind of prison. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever happens between us, I am done living as anyone other than exactly who I am. Serafina Dubois, European heiress, philanthropist, woman who fell in love with a brilliant man and made terrible choices because she was afraid of losing him. The elevator reached the ground floor, but neither of them moved toward the doors. And what if that brilliant man is not ready to love Serafina Dubois? Nathaniel asked quietly. Then I will have to find a way to live with that. But I will not hide anymore. As they walked out onto the busy street, Nathaniel realized that the woman beside him was indeed someone new. Not Sara, the careful creation designed to avoid pain, and not the scared heiress who had been exposed at the hotel. This was someone who had integrated all the pieces of herself into a whole person, wealthy but not entitled, careful but not fearful, authentic in a way that made his chest tighten with something that felt dangerously like renewed love. Serafina, he said as they reached the corner where they would part ways. Yes, I am not ready to love Serafina Dubois yet, but I think I could be, if she is patient with me. The smile that lit up her face was like sunrise after the longest night. I have waited 5 years to be loved for who I really am, she said. I can wait a little longer. The The press conference was held in the same hotel ballroom where Victor Bell had orchestrated Serafina's public humiliation 2 weeks earlier. The irony was intentional, carefully planned by Helen Morrison and her public relations team to maximize the symbolic impact of what was about to unfold. Nathaniel stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled reporters and cameras, feeling calmer than he had in years. Beside him sat Serafina, composed and dignified in a way that made her previous terror seem like something from another lifetime. 2 weeks ago, in this same room, a private matter between Miss Dubois and myself was made public in a way that was designed to cause maximum humiliation and damage, Nathaniel began. What was not known at the time was that this revelation was the result of an illegal investigation orchestrated by Mr. Victor Bell as part of a 3-year campaign of personal revenge. The room erupted with questions and camera flashes, but Nathaniel continued steadily. Today, we are here to present evidence that Mr. Bell has engaged in a pattern of corporate espionage, invasion of privacy, and abuse of charitable positions to destroy his business rivals through attacks on their personal lives. Helen Morrison stepped forward to outline the legal case they were bringing. The evidence was presented methodically, professionally, devastating in its scope and clarity. Victor Bell had not just violated their privacy, he had built an entire system for weaponizing personal information against his enemies. The victims of Mr. Bell's campaigns have included not just business rivals, but their families, their employees, and in this case, a charitable foundation that trusted him with confidential donor information, Helen explained. This is not just personal vindictiveness, this is systematic abuse of power. When it was Serafina's turn to speak, she rose with the kind of natural grace that money could not buy, but breeding could instill. I want to address the circumstances that made Mr. Bell's attack possible, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. 5 years ago, I was betrayed by someone I loved, someone who used my trust and my wealth against my family's business interests. That experience left me afraid to be authentic in my relationships, afraid that my circumstances would prevent anyone from seeing my character. She paused, looking directly at Nathaniel. That fear led me to make choices I regret deeply. I deceived someone I love about fundamental aspects of my identity, believing I was protecting our connection when I was actually undermining it. The honesty in her voice was absolute, her vulnerability genuine. I am here today not just to seek justice against someone who violated our privacy, but to take responsibility for the choices that made that violation possible. Fear does not justify deception, even when the fear is born from genuine trauma. The questions that followed were sharp, probing, designed to find inconsistencies or hidden motives. But both Nathaniel and Serafina answered with a transparency that gradually shifted the room's energy from skepticism to respect. "Mr. Ward, do you forgive Miss Dubois for her deception?" one reporter asked. "I am learning to," Nathaniel replied honestly. "Forgiveness is not an event, it is a process. We are both committed to rebuilding trust through complete honesty, even when it is difficult. Miss Dubois, do you regret the choices you made?" "I regret the deception, but I do not regret falling in love with a man who saw my character rather than my circumstances. I only wish I had trusted him and our connection enough to be honest from the beginning." After the press conference, as they stood in the hotel lobby waiting for their cars, Nathaniel felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with truth finally being told. "How do you feel?" he asked Serafina. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in 5 years, I feel completely free, because Victor will face consequences, because I finally told the truth about who I am and why I made the choices I did, because I stopped hiding behind fear and faced the consequences of my actions." She looked at him with eyes that held no shadows, no careful distance, "because I became someone worthy of authentic love." As her car arrived, Nathaniel found himself reluctant to see her go. Over the past weeks, as they had worked together to build the case against Victor, he had watched her transform from someone who hid from her truth into someone who embraced it completely. "Serafina," he said as she prepared to leave. "Yes? Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? Somewhere we can talk without cameras or lawyers or legal documents." "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Ward?" "I'm asking if you would like to start over. As ourselves this time." The smile that transformed her face was radiant with hope and possibility. "I would love that, Nathan. I would love that very much." 1 year later, the small community garden behind Serafina's apartment building was thriving in ways that defied every urban planning principle. Tomatoes climbed improvised trellises, herbs spilled out of recycled containers, and children from the building played among rows of vegetables while their parents worked side by side with trowels and watering cans. Nathaniel knelt beside a patch of basil, his expensive khakis already stained with honest dirt, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had grown stronger from months of this kind of work. Beside him, Serafina carefully transplanted seedlings with the concentration of someone who had discovered that growing things required both patience and faith. "I think we are going to need a bigger garden," she said, gesturing toward the waiting list of neighbors who wanted plots of their own. "Ward Innovations just acquired the vacant lot across the street," Nathaniel replied, sitting back on his heels to survey their work. "What would you think about turning it into a proper community garden, with greenhouses for year-round growing, maybe space for educational programs?" "That would be wonderful. The kids from the community center would love to learn about growing their own food." They worked in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded one corner of the garden. Around them, the sounds of urban life continued, traffic, construction, the distant music from someone's radio, but it felt separate from their small oasis of green. "Nathan," Serafina said, her voice carrying a note of quiet contentment. Are you happy?" He looked up from the soil to find her watching him with eyes that held no shadows, no careful calculations, nothing but genuine curiosity about his state of mind. A year of complete honesty had taught them both to ask direct questions and expect truthful answers. "Yes," he said simply. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." She was not the same woman who had sat in this garden a year ago, consumed by guilt and terror over her deceptions. The Serafina who knelt beside him now was someone who had learned to integrate all the pieces of herself, the wealth and the humility, the privilege and the service, the careful intelligence and the spontaneous joy. "Do you ever miss Sara?" he asked. "Sometimes. She was simpler, in some ways, less complicated." Serafina pulled a weed and tossed it into the compost bucket. "But she was also incomplete. She was all of my good qualities, with none of my real challenges. I fell in love with Sara. I know. But I think I love Serafina more." The words surprised them both with their quiet certainty. Over the past year, as they had rebuilt their relationship from the ground up, Nathaniel had discovered that loving someone completely, with full knowledge of their flaws and complications, was deeper and more satisfying than the idealized romance he had shared with Sara. Even though Serafina comes with European business interests and a trust fund that requires quarterly meetings with advisors in 3 different countries. Even though Serafina sometimes gets phone calls at 6 in the morning from her brother about currency fluctuations in markets I have never heard of. Even though Serafina owns more real estate than some small countries. Even though Serafina once tried to secretly buy my company because she thought it would make a nice surprise gift. They were both laughing now, remembering the conversation 6 months ago when she had casually mentioned making an offer through intermediaries, thinking he would be pleased to have the financial security of her backing. The fight that had followed had been their first real argument as authentic selves, and working through it had taught them both how to navigate the practical complications of their vastly different financial circumstances. In my defense, I thought you would appreciate not having to worry about hostile takeovers. In my defense, I explained very clearly why a man might want to maintain some independence in his career. And in our defense, we figured out how to disagree honestly without anyone storming out or hiding behind lies. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their small garden, other residents of the building began to arrive for the community dinner that had become a weekly tradition. Mrs. Park brought kimchi and rice, the Martinez family contributed homemade tortillas, and James, who could now read well enough to follow complex recipes, had made a pot of soup that filled the evening air with the scent of herbs and vegetables. Nathaniel watched Serafina move among their neighbors, equally comfortable, discussing crop rotation with elderly Mr. Thompson and helping 6-year-old Sophia sound out the names of different plants. This was who she really was. Someone who used her privilege to build community rather than walls. Someone who understood that authentic wealth came from connection rather than isolation. "She is something special, your lady," Carmen observed, appearing at his elbow with a plate of food. "Yes, she is. You know, when she first started volunteering at the center, I thought she was running from something. Rich girl trying to disappear into service work." Carmen smiled. "Turns out she was not running from anything. She was running toward something." Toward what? Toward being the person she actually wanted to be. As the evening progressed, and their neighbors shared food and stories under the fairy lights Serafina had strung between the trees, Nathaniel felt a deep sense of rightness about the life they had built together. It was not the life he had imagined a year ago, but it was better, messier and more complicated and infinitely more real. Later, as they cleaned up the dishes and packed away the folding chairs, Serafina caught his hand and pulled him toward the bench under the oak tree. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a note of barely contained excitement. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news, very good news." She pulled an envelope from her pocket. The Henderson Foundation voted to establish a permanent endowment for community education programs. $50 million to fund literacy centers, community gardens, and neighborhood improvement projects. Nathaniel whistled softly. The Henderson Foundation had been rebuilding its reputation and governance structure since Victor Bell's removal from the board and subsequent legal troubles. That is incredible. The best part is, they want Ward Innovations to design the technology platform for coordinating programs across different cities. And they want the endowment to be managed through a new non-profit that would be run by, she paused dramatically, someone with experience in both charitable giving and community organizing. Are you asking me to help you run a $50 million non-profit? I'm asking if you want to change the world with me. Officially this time, as he looked into her eyes, open, hopeful, completely honest about what she wanted and why, Nathaniel realized that this was what he had been searching for his entire adult life. Not just someone to love, but someone to build something meaningful with. Someone who shared his values and challenged his assumptions and made him want to be the best version of himself. "Serafina Marie Dubois," he said, his voice full of wonder and certainty. "Yes, I love you, completely, authentically, with full knowledge of your trust fund and your terrible habit of trying to solve problems with money and your inability to cook anything more complex than scrambled eggs. I love you too, Nathaniel Christopher Ward. Completely, authentically, with full knowledge of your workaholic tendencies and your need to control every variable and your stubborn refusal to let anyone help you, even when you desperately need help. We are going to drive each other crazy. Probably. We are going to have fights about money and work and how to load the dishwasher. Definitely. Your family is going to think I'm after your inheritance, and my friends are going to think you are slumming with the middle class. without question. And we are going to do it all honestly, openly, without hiding behind fear or pride or carefully constructed versions of ourselves. Promise. Promise. When he kissed her, it tasted like the future. Complicated and uncertain and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Around them, the community garden rustled with evening breezes, and the lights of the city sparkled like distant stars. They had found each other by accident, lost each other through deception, and found each other again through the courage to be completely, authentically themselves. It was not the love story either of them had expected, but it was the love story they had both been waiting for their entire lives. As they walked back toward her apartment, hand in hand under the starlight, Nathaniel reflected on how much had changed since that first reluctant blind date. He had learned that authentic love required not just finding the right person, but becoming the right person. Someone brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to admit mistakes, and generous enough to forgive them. "Nathan," Serafina said as they reached her door. "Yes, thank you for seeing me, all of me. Even when I was afraid to let you, thank you for teaching me that the most extraordinary life is not the one without problems, but the one where you face the problems with someone you love." Inside her apartment, surrounded by books and plants and photographs of the community they had built together, they began to plan their future. Not as Nathaniel Ward, successful CEO, or Serafina Dubois, European heiress, but as two people who had found in each other the courage to be completely, imperfectly, authentically themselves. It was, they both agreed, the most beautiful way to live. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.